Ashley, thank you so much for speaking with me today. So you bought Autolift Garage Doors about 6 months ago, which means you're fresh in the driver's seat. Tell me, what is your background and how did you end up in the ETA world?
Yeah. I'm a manufacturing engineer by training, but I'm a bit dusty in that space. Um, I started my career in medical device manufacturing, and then 12 years ago moved over to Australia from the US with my partner and reinvented myself a little bit, got more into operations and supply chain because there wasn't as much medical device manufacturing here. And then about 3 years ago, I realized I wanted to make a pivot. So I found the ETA space and it just got me really interested.
Amazing. Because I saw you did a MBA. Is that how you discovered the whole ETA world, or was it
Yeah.
something you were already aware of, or how did you end up there?
No, ETA is still quite unfamiliar to the university scene here, although we're making a lot of progress to become part of that ecosystem, holding quite a few events at Melbourne Business School, which is very exciting. But no, I discovered ETA. I was in a sales role and I reached out to Paige, who owns Austral Herbs, and she didn't need what I was selling. But I was so fascinated by the idea of this woman who had just acquired her business. She was patient enough to answer all my questions, and she introduced me to Pete Seligman, and that was it for me.
Wow, happy accident. Okay, and then how did the search begin? I mean, I know you mentioned that you transitioned from a sort of traditional search model to then more of a self-funded search. But talk me through kind of the early stages of setting up the search process for yourself and that transition. How did all that happen?
Yeah. So when I started out, and it took me probably about a year of reading and research, connecting with people, to make the decision that I wanted to do a search and do ETA. And I chose originally a traditional search path because I come from an operations background. I have no deals experience, and I really felt I was going to need some partners in that process with me to help me through that. But I raised funds for about 6 months and I felt like I was getting to the end of my rope. But towards the tail end of that process, I started searching and I ended up stumbling across a business that I put an offer in on. And once I put that offer together, this like thing clicked in my head and I said, I can do this. Like, I don't need investors to help me through this bit. I need investors to support me in the acquisition, depending on the business. But, I said, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm not going to let not raising a traditional fund keep me from what I want to do here. And so I just started searching. And I was convinced that if I found the right business, I would be able to get the right investors on board.
Okay, so then how do things look different, I suppose, from the path you took, not being a traditional searcher, as opposed to kind of this whole self-funded process? Because you
Yeah.
said you searched for 6 months. That 6 months, had you raised anything at all, or you were kind of in the raising process and then
No.
you just decided to drop that?
Yeah, I was in the raising process and I was searching in parallel.
Okay.
And then once I found that first business, um, I had been working on some contracts and I decided to stop working, give myself another 6 months to dedicate myself full time to search. And in that sense, I looked very much like a self-funded searcher, so I didn't have anyone backing me at that stage. I was nurturing the relationships that I had built with investors over time, and leaning on them when I did find things that looked interesting. But probably another 6 months after I got that process started, I came across Autolift and, at that point in time, I was fully self-funded, but Autolift was big enough that I was not going to be able to acquire it by myself and with the bank. So I began the process of essentially looking for co-investors.
Okay, got it. So before we get into Autolift, tell me a bit more about the search process. I mean, how did it go? Did you do proprietary or brokered search? How many people did you reach out to if you were reaching out directly?
Yeah.
How was the process itself finding the business? And how many serious conversations did you have before you ended up settling on Autolift?
Yeah. I feel like the search approach, there's a spectrum to that. There's the group that are, very personal, direct outreach. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is highly automated, lots of email campaigns. I was very much on the first side of that spectrum, where I was reaching out to a select number of owners, and really trying to connect with them one-on-one. Had a schedule that I would follow each week, where I would look to reach out to somewhere between 20 to 30 owners. I would go out and I would drive around various industrial parks and look for businesses that looked interested or interesting, and I would look them up and get in contact with them. And I had a day where I would reach out to kind of advisors, brokers, consultants, accountants, anyone in that space that might be able to make a connection if they knew of someone looking to exit their business. So I just did that lather, rinse, repeat for a few months. And through that process, I got introduced to a broker who had Autolift in an off-market deal. It had not been published yet. And that's what I found. I feel like there's an element of luck in it, though, too. I think it was 4, maybe 5 months until I found Autolift. And I feel like that's so short for search.
Sure. And did you have any issues with people taking you seriously? If you were doing a self-funded search, generally what I found is brokers will ask for proof of funds or who are your investors or whatever the case
Absolutely.
May be. Just to make sure, you actually have the capacity to buy the business. How did you handle that if you were running self-funded search?
Yeah. I mean, especially the early conversations, I wouldn't have trusted me either. I had no idea what I was talking about in those first few. But, I had some investors who had expressed interest in backing me as I had gone through the traditional search process. So I felt comfortable enough saying I have backers, even though, that money wasn't in my pocket. And it was going to be deal dependent and among a number of other things. So I felt comfortable stretching the truth a little bit to build some credibility, but it also took me having a few of those conversations where I put my foot in my mouth a few times to build a better kind of rapport with brokers.
Okay, absolutely. And then you found Autolift Garage Doors. Were you looking specifically for manufacturing, or your search was fairly sector agnostic, or what was your criteria when you were searching?
Yeah, it required all the kind of typical criteria of recurring revenue, size, et cetera, and customer distribution. I wanted something in manufacturing to go back to my roots a little bit. I felt like, of the things that I could add value on, it was a space where I would be able to contribute in the business. I had a few other areas that I was looking at, waste and waste remediation or recycling was of high interest to me. Definitely wasn't looking for anything in garage doors. I'd never even thought about the garage door space before. But light manufacturing was of high interest to me.
Okay. So what were the first impressions of this business, and what was it that ultimately attracted you to them to end up buying it?
Yeah. I was in Melbourne at the time and the business was in Sydney. So I didn't see the business for a while until I had prepared an offer and submitted an offer because there was one other offer on the table. What stood out to me straight away was the revenue model. So we have this amazing revenue model whereby we manufacture and install garage doors for multi-unit apartment buildings. Those doors then need to be maintained and serviced, repaired, and often replaced over the course of their life cycle. So if we can get in on that cycle, it just builds on itself over time. And the moment I realized that existed, it was just a light bulb moment for me. It had the essential criteria of recurring revenue in its service and maintenance business. You'd always love that to be as high as possible, but it ticked the box. I also had great rapport with the owner. As far as like the conversations we had going back and forth in the early conversations. Yeah, but I think it was that revenue flywheel that got it for me.
Okay, perfect. And you mentioned that you were living in Melbourne before. Did you have to move? Did you pick up a family and kids? How was that whole experience?
Yeah, so we were living in Melbourne for 12 years. And then in January, we moved up to Sydney for the business. That was a wild ride, and the whole deals process, even up until the very end, you're trying to hold this balance of conviction for the deal and getting it done, as well as like the brutal facts of it could fall over at any minute. You could uncover something that unravels it all. And so I felt the burden with my family of not committing to moving until we were, 99% confident in the deal. So we really didn't even start looking for a place until late November. And then I think we got, again, very lucky and found a place not too far from the business. So packed up pretty quickly, moved in January, and got started in Feb.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. And the process of moving the family itself, like how was it moving kids and changing schools
Yeah.
and all of that? I'd
Yeah.
imagine it'd take an emotional
Hard.
toll for the
Yeah.
family, not just
Yeah.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah. The family is very supportive, first and foremost. I'm lucky my husband has very flexible work. The kids are young. They're 6 and 8. So, one of them hadn't gotten started in school yet. And the eldest one, we planted seeds with her very early. And I did promise her a puppy and a pool. And she has both of those now. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. Very nice. Um, and so, I mean, obviously, aside from the whole family thing, how did the DD process go? Were there any, big obstacles or hiccups or anything like that? How was the process?
The process was pretty smooth. I took on a lot of it myself. Again, I was self-funded. So every cent mattered, I did have an accounting group helping with my financial due diligence and a legal group doing the legals. But, like building my model, the business case model, the LBO, I did that myself, which is not my background. And it was 10 brutal days of pulling that together. At the end, I'm glad I did it because I feel like I can feel the numbers in my bones now. But it was a lot of me. So in that sense, I think it took longer than other people might take in a due diligence. I think I even lost a bet to another searcher with how long it took me. But no real surprises in due diligence. I think our biggest challenge was the networking capital and the lack of an inventory system to actually be confident in a number that they were giving us. That didn't get any easier when we got here. We only just did the stock take a few weeks ago, and it took us weeks. So no big surprises, but working through the networking capital was a challenge, and we definitely didn't have a traditional agreement in that. It was abnormal what we agreed in the end. And I'm lucky it panned out the way it did.
So from the self-funded search perspective with due diligence, how does that work mechanically in terms of funding the DD? I mean, you said you obviously do a lot of it yourself, but there's still, I'd imagine, considerable, if not accounting, at least like legal costs to actually facilitate the transaction. Yeah, mechanically, does that end up being paid out of the target or the acquired entity once you're up and running, or did you have to pull it out of your own pocket, or did it get added to the to what you're raising from investors? How does that work?
Yeah. So that was the kind of the risk and the leap of faith that I took, was to cover those costs, and those costs were considered part of the equity in the deal. But I did have to pay for all of that upfront. So I covered the accounting fees and the legal fees. I'm grateful that the team that I chose and that I worked with are very entrepreneur friendly, and so they had kind of staged. We had stages for those payments, and the pricing was agreed up front, and there were success fees, etc. So that worked really well for me to manage risk, but that was on me. And only if we succeeded in acquiring the business did I kind of get that value in the equity of the company.
Okay. And if the deal had fallen through, would that cash have just had to come out of your pocket, or were you working on a rolling fee basis with a firm where, you then roll the fees into the next deal, or were there any sort of arrangements like that, getting more creative, I suppose?
No, that's very clever. I didn't have any of that in place. That would have been nice to have. But if it had fallen over, I imagine, I would have had some good rapport with those groups. We didn't have any agreements in place that would have passed those fees forward into the next
Okay,
deal.
absolutely. Perfect. I mean, it sounds like it luckily went quite smoothly anyway. And then in terms of the deal itself, however much you're comfortable sharing in terms of size of the business, EBITDA, purchase price, give us an indication or some sense of the size of the business and the deal itself.
So Autolift does 20 mil in turnover, with 4 mil in EBITDA. So decent sized business. And I think bigger than I was planning as a self-funded searcher. I definitely had that oh shit moment when they accepted my offer. About 30% of that revenue is reoccurring in the service space, which gave me a lot of confidence. And I think when I came into the business, I really realized the value of that, because that didn't miss a beat when we engaged and turned on our accounting system. We have 50 people, 20 of those in the manufacturing facility, with probably another 8 in the field doing service and installation. We're Sydney-based only right now. I think we're going to be limited for some time geographically until we can kind of match our service and install teams to support that revenue flywheel. But there's not a lot of players outside of this area, and I think it's definitely an opportunity for growth in the future.
Got it. And you said you had that oh shit moment, like how am I going to fund this thing? How did you fund it in the end?
Yeah.
How was it structured?
Yeah. So a combination of debt and equity from investors. Pretty typical, about 45% debt, with the rest in invested equity. It is, not being a traditional search, and I didn't know where the funding was going to come from. And I knew that the search fund community here in Australia was probably not going to be big enough to support me on this. I needed to position my deal and the structure of the deal in a way that would speak to more typical traditional private equity or high net worth individual investment groups. So I went with more of a 0 and 30 structure with the investors. And then just went hunting for the right partners from there. So it was really hard yards. I think that's probably raising the money for this acquisition was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. I think I reached out to 450 investors. I met with 115 and I landed at 12. So it was, 3 months of trying to do the due diligence on the business and at the same time raising the money in the background.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a 0 and 30 structure. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so 0 management fees. So I sit as the CEO in the business and I don't take any kind of fees as the management of the asset. And then a 30% carry. So if I deliver on the results for the investors over the next 7+ years, then I can earn 30% carry in the business on top of the
fantastic
that I paid to buy the business.
And did you find that the dynamics of the conversations were different because you already had a deal and you were not coming into this as a funded searcher? I mean, how do you imagine those conversations go differently? I think it's a bit of a difficult question to answer because you didn't have those the conversations as a funded searcher. But yeah, I mean, did you have a little bit more leverage because you already have a deal, or how was it received?
I mean, I had all the leverage. It was, I think, a very fortunate position to be in. And it took me a while to realize that. And then when I got a couple investors on board, I was really able to play to that strength. I had never done a deal before, and it was almost not helpful when I would talk to people about, I'm trying to figure out how to structure this, and say, oh, well, you can be as creative as you want. But I had never done one before, so that was meaningless to me. But Pete Seligman challenged me to make it as simple as possible. And I was grateful for that because, if I was going to go into a pitch with a private equity firm and try and explain an acquisition model that was even remotely complex, they would have seen right through me because that's not my background. It's not my experience. So I made it as simple as humanly possible.
Okay, fantastic. And now you're sitting in the driver's seat. How was day one, week one, month one? Kind of
Yeah.
talk us through exactly what the experience was like running your own business.
Yeah. It is the wildest ride you could ever go on. Um, Day one, I think actually even a few days before day one, like I realized like the number of contracts that I needed to have printed and prepared and everything. So, walking out of my house with this like stack of contracts, and that's like the photo I have of my husband wishing me off to my first day. Um, you prepare for the speech that you make in front of everybody. And of course, it never really goes as planned. I had prepared it with one of the owners, and that morning he got, I think the nerves hit him and he got a little bit jittery, and he looks to the other owner and says, oh, no, so-and-so, will you please make the speech? And he goes, oh, yeah, sure. He says, have you prepared anything? He says, no, but I'm just going to wing it. So he gets up in front of everybody and says, just without any introduction, so we've sold the business. And, you can just see everyone's eyes like looking around, just with panic. And I'm just sitting there be like, oh my God, what's happening? But yeah, I that's the first week and first few days. You learn the nuances of the different behaviors and some of the challenges with those behaviors. A lot of them are just historical. And you try and find, how are you going to do this your way? And I'm still figuring that out. Even just the other day, we realized that the previous owner, one thing that he had done was prioritize install jobs. We kind of knew that, but it was more based on, the priority of his jobs. But even in him not prioritizing his own jobs, we had a gap. And when the water level in jobs got high enough, that became a challenge. So, yeah, finding all of the ways in which the owners stepping away impact the business, it's hard to spot up front, and it's just one that I think we'll continue to learn about over the course of the next year.
Okay. And then in terms of sort of identifying opportunities for growth and having an idea or a picture as to what you're going to fix, obviously during due diligence, you have certain ideas, and that may change once you're actually sitting in the driver's seat. But what had you identified during due diligence as opportunities for the business, and how did that go once you actually got in there?
Yeah. So the aim is to grow the business primarily through the service and maintenance space. We'd like that to be at least 50% of our revenue in the next 5 years. The service and maintenance space or the industry is highly fragmented, which was part of our hypothesis going into this. But as we're getting into this space, realizing that it's fragmented because there's lots of one-man bands, mom and pop shops that do service in their local neighborhood. So, the acquisition pipeline the market is even more fragmented than I think we expected. There's only a few larger players that you'd be interested in buying through acquisition. We are learning about growth opportunities that I don't think we thought of before we came in, which has been exciting and kind of eye-opening. And we're also learning about, I think, the weight and the cost of growth. So growing our new install space requires, revising our sales methods, probably increasing the number of sales reps, refining our manufacturing, adding on install technicians. So growing our new install business, or the doors side of the business, is going to be a process and probably a longer journey than we expected.
I'd imagine the install side of the business, being sort of more bespoke garage doors, is more of a sort of, it's human resources that you're leveraging, as opposed to sort of repeatable manufacturing process where you are leveraging large machinery, and then, in order to grow, you have to buy more machines. Do you think in this business, is it going to require less working capital than what you had initially expected from a manufacturing business in order to continue to grow it? Does it? I'd imagine it's there's, the ceiling is higher because all you have to do is hire new people, which comes with its own challenges, but is less sort of financially burdensome than buying equipment and machinery. How does that side look?
Yeah. So from a CapEx perspective, if you could see my manufacturing floor, the equipment that's out there, it's dinosaur equipment. And when I first saw that, when I came for a visit, I basically planned for that stuff to start dying the moment I walked in the door. But now getting here, I'm realizing actually that equipment, although it's old, if it's maintained, it's so simple and so well made that it will probably last us a very long time. Right now, although we haven't done an exercise on this, I don't anticipate we'll need more equipment to make what we're doing and to increase our volume. It won't be the thing that breaks first if I throw twice as much volume in here. So the CapEx requirement is not where I thought it was. It's not in manufacturing. On the flip side, we've got a fleet of 18 vehicles, and to grow in service technicians, we need more vehicles. And those vehicles are also, some of them are getting a bit older and are not fit for purpose or aren't safe. So, the CapEx that I had planned in manufacturing is really just being diverted, a fraction of it, to fleet and making sure that we have the right fleet on the road, driving marketing.
I see. And then next steps for you guys, are you looking at these other acquisition or potential acquisitions yet? Or is it just these targets are too small and the market is too fragmented, which you made mention of? How's that looking?
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely open to it. It's fascinating, as a searcher, it's so hard, the search, and it's such a grind, and you're just trying to get anyone to take you seriously. And then it's true when they say you get into the seat and opportunities literally just fly at you. So we've had a handful of opportunities present to us. We haven't gone looking for them. And we're leveraging my board and their teams to evaluate those so that I'm not kind of taken off track and off focus from the business. Nothing committed as of yet, but the market's very exciting. So I think there's some opportunities that we'll be looking at.
Okay, fantastic. You also just mentioned a board. Is that a board that you assembled before you acquired the business, or who's on that board? How did that come about? And how do they support you?
Acquired it through the capital raise process. Some of them were obvious. They are all, I have 3 board members. And they're a fantastic mix of kind of an entrepreneur-focused board member, a private equity investor, and a high net worth individual who's essentially done what I'm doing right now in a similar business. So they all bring such a unique perspective to the conversation, and they're all incredibly supportive. So I got fortunate that they came on board in the investment, and because of the level of investment that they made, they also wanted a board seat. And again, maybe it's luck, but they just ended up being, I think, the perfect mix for us.
So throughout this whole process from search all the way to operating the business that you bought, what would you say is the biggest challenge or set of challenges that you faced, and how did you end up overcoming them?
Biggest challenges. I mean, I touched on the capital raise process. That was absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done. Coming into the business, I think that I feel like my career has prepared me pretty well for this. So, while there's extreme highs and lows every day, the challenges that we faced here have not been the greatest challenges in this process. I'm sure there will be some that will test that. But right now, I would really say, going all the way back to the start, getting this deal across the line with the investors, and from a personal perspective, being able to hold, as I said, the conviction for the deal and the brutal truth that it might not happen, to have a non-biased view on the deal. But having that balance was probably the greatest lesson that I took away.
Okay, fantastic. And so if you were giving advice to a searcher now that is just beginning their search or has just found a deal and is getting ready to capital raise, what advice would you give them? What would you have done differently going through the process?
Yeah. So, that you hear it said all the time for searchers to just get started, start searching, because what you learn through that process, the people that you meet, the opportunities that you uncover, I think it's probably It is the hardest thing to do, probably the highest value add. And just, my husband and I call it pushing pebbles. It's every single day, do the little things that move the big picture. So contact the 3 people, follow up with the 2 emails, but find a way to put in the little bits to grind every single day.
Okay. How is your work-life balance now that you've done the deal and you're operating the business? Is it as you expected, or you're working heaps more? You're pulling 80, 90, 100-hour weeks? What does it all look like?
Yeah. No, I'm fortunate that the business has quite reasonable hours. I think about this often, actually. Had I made a choice to acquire a business that operated at night or over the weekends, my life would look very different. But the team are in here at about 5:30 and out at about 4 in kind of waves. And so my work-life balance is pretty good. I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of support at home. But no, I haven't had to pull extreme hours. And if anything else, I'm still so excited and enthusiastic about this that I have to force myself to shut off a little bit, but that's probably just how I'm wired too.
Fantastic. Okay. Now, so Ashley, for people that want to reach out to you and ask you any questions about the process, or perhaps are just curious about what you've achieved, what's the best place for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, probably find me on LinkedIn is the best place right now. So Ashley Alfs Detweiler. Connect with me or send me a message and give me a couple days and I'm sure I'll be back to you.
Thank you for coming and sharing your story today, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Dimitri.